So this is a session dedicated to what Eric Ries has learned since 2011. I assume that means around the lean startup theory.
Yes.
Could be around other things. And I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm Ted Greenwald. I'm an editor at the Wall Street Journal. This is Eric Ries. He's a big thinker around how business can be done and how it can be done more efficiently, effectively, faster, and ultimately more profitably. Eric's theory is called the lean startup. Could I see a show of hands of people who've read the book, The Lean Startup? All right, pretty good. Okay, we'll try not to do too much review, but I do want to kind of sketch out the outlines of what Eric built as a way of getting into what he's learned since the foundation went down. But anyway, Eric, you conceived the Lean Startup first in a blog post.
Yeah.
Right? It all started with a blog post, and from there, oh, you know what? Actually, before we get into that, I just want to mention if you're tweeting, please use hashtag Lean Startup. And also, there is a microphone somewhere, audience left, that will be open for questions at the end if we have time. But anyway, so
I should get a picture of this. This is crazy.
So the Lean Startup started with Eric's blog, Startup Lessons Learned, and from there it spread like wildfire through Silicon Valley. In 2011, the book came out. From there it spread across the country. I know it became part of the curriculum at Harvard Business School. I know there have been several South by Southwest sessions. And sometime last year, a guy who's involved in the startup scene in Beijing was telling me how important lean startup principles are to people in that territory. I took account of the meetups, 2,300 meetups now, some 700,000 members in 600 cities in 80 countries, all dedicated to exploring lean startup principles and trying to put this theory to work.
That's what we call vanity metrics. They sound good, don't they?
Sorry about that.
No, it's my pleasure. This is what they're for.
So, Eric, you started out by saying, let's apply the scientific method to building sustainable businesses.
Yeah.
And see whether it works. Right, so has it been proven?
Well, proving a scientific theory, is challenging because this is kind of like a scientific meta theory. It's like a scientific method for how we apply startups. And for those who are new to the idea, the typical startup development process is you build this beautiful, epic business plan. That's basically like a fiction writing contest. You paint this picture of things that are going to happen in the future, and then you and your investors pretend that it is an actual prediction about the future. That's kind of where we go off the rails, in my opinion. You build for many years, and you launch something, and it's supposed to be great. And my experience, anyway, when I did it that way, is that there's like this tiny little problem, which is that the customers don't read the business plan. And so they don't behave the way that it says they're supposed to. It says customers on such and such day will show up to buy your product, do all these great things, and then I don't know what your experience has been like. My experience was that kind of never happened. And the alternative is to say, let's treat the business plan not as unimportant, but rather as a series of hypotheses that can be tested scientifically, and let's start to ask ourselves, what would happen if we built our product development not around, hey, here's the specification, do what it says. It says, like, what's the experiment we're trying to run, and how do we learn as quickly as possible what's really going to happen in the future? So, that was very helpful in my own career and the startups that I've personally built and invested in. Now I've got the chance to work with, hundreds of startups and big companies and all kinds of people who've used these ideas and found them helpful. So that is the evidence, such as it is, that it works. Now occasionally, I'll get a very smart, usually like an MBA student, in a class like at the Harvard Business School, be like, well, isn't it possible that all those people would have been successful even if they didn't use Lean Startup? And maybe it just happens to attract really smart and good-looking people who have a lot of success. And it's like, can I prove that didn't happen? No, but I think now that we have like 700,000 people or whatever it was,
So
like,
we have
what are the odds that all the people who just so happened to otherwise would have been successful happen to be attracted to this? I don't think so. But I think, that hasn't been, this is only, we're talking about since 2011, so we're not even just coming really on 5 years. There hasn't been the kind of like rigorous longitudinal study, academic research to prove it yet. But I hope that one day there will be, and I hope it will show that it's been pretty helpful.
So can I ask you to describe the lean startup really in a nutshell? We could easily fill the session with it, but
sure.
Can we just give a compact description?
The fastest way to do it is to say that a startup is not just what you see in the movies, and it's not just two guys in a garage. A startup is anybody trying to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty, which means anytime we don't know what's going to happen in the future, we only have a theory or a hope about it. And so, if that's you, if you don't know what's going to happen, you only have a hope, then it makes sense to use science and not astrology to figure out what's going to happen. Instead of making the future happen through vision and determination and will and force of mind, say, look, let's test all the components of that business plan to understand what's really necessary. We do that as quickly as possible with what we call the minimum viable product, or MVP. The smallest version of the product necessary to do the experiment, to start the process of learning. We have an iterative feedback loop we call build, measure, learn. And we just say, look, the most likely way to succeed is to, as quickly as possible, learn what customers actually want. Learn which elements of the business plan make sense and which ones are maybe more on the crazy side. And jettison the crazy ones, emphasize the good ones. And that we call that process a pivot. A change in strategy without a change in vision, our most notorious piece of jargon for those who are new. Sorry. But that's kind of the essence of entrepreneurship, is to say, look, when we encounter difficulty, when something doesn't work, we don't just give up and go home. But neither do we persevere the plane straight into the ground through stubbornness. We kind of find this middle road where we say, like, let's figure out the things that are working and double down on those. Is that fast enough?
That was good. That's good. So originally, the name of the theory is lean startup. You kind of had this idea that this was the way to start a new business. I wonder what you've discovered in terms of the limits of the theory for company age, company size, industry, the type of product produced.
I mean, the answer to this question has been getting crazier and crazier over the past 5 years, because with my background, for those who don't know, I was a computer programmer, so I'm like that kid in the parents' basement, like programming computers like all day long, all night long. I couldn't believe as a child when I found out that you could get paid for programming. Like, I thought it was just like playing video games, something you did for fun, and I was like, you could make a career out of that? I was absolutely stunned. And I was completely sure that's what I would do my whole life. You people will pay me to do this, I will do this 24/7, like as long as I live and breathe. I never thought that I would be doing this, whatever this is, for a living. And, so that's who I was thinking about, and that's what I was working on when I was thinking about lean startup. It was Silicon Valley, tech startups, people working on software. That's, and the first time that like someone from a slightly larger software company called me up and said, hey, do you think we could apply these ideas? I was like, probably not. You're probably doomed, good luck, But anyway, it's like not my department, I was doing the startup thing, you guys. And it was actually very far-sighted general managers starting a company called Intuit and many others still kind of dragged me forcing and screaming to say like, no, let's pay attention to what these ideas apply, because I had made this kind of logical deduction. I put it up on a slide the very first time I ever spoke about lean startup. I had a slide and it said, a startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty, asterisk, nothing to do with size of company, industry, or sector. I thought it was kind of like an interesting finding of my exploration of what entrepreneurship was, and people started to take that as a challenge. So people would call me up or come to me after a talk, and they would say, Eric, I accept your challenge. I would say, what challenge? I'm not sure what you mean. Like, well, I am in this situation. I started out, just I'm in a slightly larger tech company. My startup's a little bit older, and then it started to be, well, I'm in a consumer hardware technology company, and then it started to be like, I'm in a non-technology industrial company, or like a service business, consulting, and then it started to be healthcare and aerospace and energy, and then it started to be like, I'm in a government, an NGO, I work for the United Nations or the World Bank. Like, started to get very far from Silicon Valley, and each time I learned not to be like, no, screw you, like I did the first time. I don't recommend that. I was like, well, let's experiment and let's explore together and see what happens. The first time I did a diesel engine, I didn't know if it was going to work out okay, but I said, let's go try it. And now, the theory has worked out really well in a lot of those places. So it's kind of moved much further beyond Silicon Valley than I expected. I did not expect there to be hundreds of meetup groups around the world. Like all Silicon Valley people, I'm very myopic. I think about, our like 12 square blocks of innovation. The idea that there's this, massive ecosystem out there in the rest of the world, that's been a process for me of like having my eyes opened by the fact that there's so many incredible entrepreneurs in so many places in the world. So there's kind of this geographic distribution, to new places, and this industry and sector distribution that I didn't really anticipate or understand at the time. It was really exciting.
But your asterisk, you haven't run into a situation yet where you felt you just couldn't apply these ideas.
Well, who are you talking to? It's kind of my job to be like, let's go find out. I think there are, like, certainly in an established organization, there are a lot of other I consider external factors that can make this impossible. So one of the things I've really learned is there's a lot of work that goes into building a management system in a company of any size that allows it to have internal startups. And people, when I say that, people are like, oh, that's some big company thing, I don't need to worry about that. But some of you right now are founding companies, I'm guessing, right? So if you show of hands, I think who's actually a founder of a company right now? Okay, so some of you found your company because you don't like big companies very much. Can I see a show of hands who don't like big companies very much? Okay, so here's my question to all of you, just raise your hand. If you hate big companies so much, why are you trying to create a new one? That's the question we don't ask ourselves nearly enough as entrepreneurs, because what happens to a lot of my friends who, are post-product market fit startups who live in the dream, their company grows to 100, 500,000, 5,000, 10,000 people, and all of a sudden, and they won't say this publicly, but privately, they're like, I couldn't even get hired in this company anymore. And I'm not sure I would really want to work here. Like, it's cool being the CEO, like, I don't mind, that's okay, but like, if I was an actual employee, we're built this bureaucratic, siloed, functional organization. The people who work for me who have titles that say product manager, their intuition about how to do things in an entrepreneurial way is like all wrong. And of course, from the founder's point of view, it's their fault. But the role I have evolved into is I'm the person that comes in, meets with senior leadership and says, listen, if you don't like the results you're getting in your organization, look in the mirror. Now you're looking at the problem. Because what founders inadvertently do is they send a signal and they create systems and incentives for their company, starting quite early, that make sure everyone else in the company knows that if anyone innovates, they'll be fired. It's that simple. It's not like you're allowed to innovate, it's okay, but it's not your job. It's actually, I would go so far as to say most company systems make it impossible to innovate and actually make it a career-limiting move. And then as those companies grow bigger, the problems just get worse and worse and worse and worse. So what I think is really interesting is for us to be increasingly considering the question, not just how do you start a company, how do you get started, how do you build an MVP, but this kind of broader question of like, what kind of company do you want to create in the first place? Do you want to be one of those companies that has like that one good idea it had once, and then it like grows by exploiting that good idea increasingly efficiently, forever until someone disrupts you and you're like, oops, didn't see that coming? Or do you want to build the kind of company that can grow and sustain itself through continuous innovation? I think it's a very interesting question.
So I do want to get into the kind of structure that it takes to accomplish that.
Yeah.
Right, but actually before we get to that, you told me I know you've been doing a lot of work for GE. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a bunch of other company names to me. I wonder if you could just map out the last 3 years of your career.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, it's a weird thing doing this for a living, because once the book came out, the book was published in 2011 to kind of catch people up on the story, and it became a New York Times bestseller immediately, and a lot of people read it. And of course, my purpose in writing the book was to make sure that not just Silicon Valley startups, but other people kind of got the message about how work should be organized, so they stopped doing this crazy like waterfall nonsense. And then, because it's a book and it's a New York Times best-selling book, if it has a certain credibility, it's the kind of book you can hand to your boss and say, hey, I think we should do that. And when people started to do that inside really large companies, your boss has a boss, who has a boss, who has a boss. So the book can start to get passed up the chain. Like by the time it got to Jeff Immelt, the CEO of GE, I was really nervous. Like, wait, hold on. I got that phone call. I was like, okay. I'm happy to.
Yeah, but you said regardless of any size.
Right, I know. But I didn't really mean. Even if you have 100, GE has 300,000 employees worldwide, and if you had asked me in 2011, would one day your ideas be part of the foundation of a new change at GE, I would have been like, that sounds cool, but it seems kind of unlikely, don't you think? And they'd be building a new agency at the White House, basically. Seems unlikely to me, but the last few years have been a study in things that are unlikely. So yeah, so there's been kind of the GEs of the world. One of the most engagements I did was most meaningful to me was, lean startup is based on lean manufacturing, which comes from the Toyota production system. I got an email one day from Toyota that said, would you come in and talk to us about lean startup? It was like getting called into the principal's office a little bit. Am I going to be in trouble? Is it okay that I did this? And we had a very interesting conversation, and I got to meet some of their senior folks from Japan. And they were very excited. Of all the companies I've worked with, they were by far the least defensive, like from day one. They're like, listen, this isn't like a really great application, these ideas that we want to talk about. You know, we're obviously the world's experts in lean for supply chain and manufacturing and back-end operations of the company, but you know, one of their executives called it the missing half of the Toyota production system. To not ask how do I build things more efficiently, but to be asking what are the things I should build in the first place. So like that was, you know, super cool. You know, I love to name drop the White House, that's of course really cool, but there's also like tons of municipal and city governments that have adopted this. Some of you know the Nonprofit Code for America, where I was on the board for a while. So like that's kind of one half of my work is these big behemoth organizations. And then, you know, and I continue to work with startups. So I continue to invest in startups, and I continue to, you know, work with my friends who are in you know, in these venture-backed startups. And at a certain point, I started to really see this congruence, because what was happening was I had been talking about entrepreneurship as the management discipline that deals with extreme uncertainty like since before 2011. But a lot of the very early adopters of lean startup, let's be honest, they did not take that part very seriously. They were like, woohoo, MVP, like let's do it. And pivot, and like all the stuff that fits on a bumper sticker, they love that part the most. And that's the part that, you know, most people latch onto from when they start. They don't pay attention as much to the managerial and accounting stuff because it's frankly really boring. And you know, entrepreneurship is supposed to be exciting, so like that tends to get second attention. And so what happened was some of my people who were really early on in that movement, like their CEO would call me up 2, 3, 4 years later and say, hey, now that my company's some size, remember that thing you were talking about with something like management something? Like, could you come in and talk to us about that? And the first couple times I was like, I'm gonna go in and say, I told you so, whatever. Like, that doesn't work very well. It's a consulting practice, so don't do that. But eventually I kind of got my head out of whatever the wrong orifice it was in, and started to like go talk to people and actually have the conversation, not just with the founder and CEO, but the people that work there, and to realize that the conversation I'm having with, you know, a Dropbox or a One Kings Lane or a Twilio, it's like substantively the same as the conversation I'm having with Jeff Intel, which people generally don't believe that. I don't know, I'm kind of looking at people like shaking their heads, like, yeah, it's not something that most people believe, but you know, I'm here to say it's true. Because it doesn't matter if your company's 5 years old or 100 years old, if it's built to that same old-fashioned 20th century blueprint, you're going to get those same old-fashioned, you know, bureaucratic problems. And you know, that's actually a really fun problem to work on.
Well, let's dive into the structural aspects of that. So,
sure.
You've got a bunch of things that need to be in place in order to innovate, in order to form an entrepreneurial culture.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can isolate some of those for us, and you know, I can prod you a little bit.
Oh yeah, well, it's a huge question. I mean, the first thing we have to talk about is what's not required. Like most companies think that they don't have the right people to innovate, and it doesn't matter. Like when I talk to senior leadership, like the people that work for me, you know, they're not going to do this. It's too radical. It's our people are conservative, and they're this and they're that. And I'm like, well, can I go interview some of your employees? And I go talk to the employees, and they're like, well, we're on board with senior management. I mean, they're never, you know, so we're all going like this. I talk to the engineers. Engineers are like, well, we of course embrace this absolutely, but those designers. Last night I was talking to a team which is like, oh, the designers are just, they're perfectionistic and they go on for that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, can I go talk to some designers? And you know, designers are like, those engineers, they would never go for that. It's like, so everyone's got a reason why it's somebody else's fuss. So like, my experience has been, no matter what company, no matter how old, no matter how big, whatever, there are entrepreneurs that work in the company right now. Some of them are probably in this room, right? Some of you are that entrepreneurial person. If I had your personnel file from HR, it's like full of black marks, and like, you know, does not play well with others, and they're always on the brink of being fired, and then like massively promoted, and like living that bipolar existence. Some of you know what I'm talking about. So the entrepreneurs are already there. The problem is that the system around them is not really being supported. So the question is like, what would it be like? And some of you who work in a larger organization, like ask yourself this question: what would it be like if you came into work one day, and your leadership told you, instead of sending you into battle with like both hands tied behind your back and blindfolded, what if we actually created an environment where you were supported in doing the thing that you do best? Like, what would that look like? And that's what I've had the chance to experiment with. So, for example, entrepreneurship is a function of the corporation. I call it the missing function right now. It's as if you had a corporation that had no marketing department. And that, believe it or not, there was a time when companies didn't have a marketing department. Marketing is a relatively new specialty. It's a relatively new discipline. Like, there was not always a chief marketing officer. Companies that don't have a marketing department, they still do marketing, but like there's no one really in charge of it. And it's like no one's in charge of the strategy of it. And there's no way to progress as a marketing person in your career path. And so like other people have to kind of do it on the side. Like some engineers do it, some product managers do it, like kind of make it all work. That's true for every function. Well, there's no entrepreneurship function. So what if your business card Most of you who are corporate entrepreneurs have a business card, and it says, so-and-so product manager, or project manager, or team leader, or whatever it says. Some companies like chief engineer. What it doesn't say is founder, entrepreneur. It says something that, and if I go to your peers in the organization who have the same business card, like the person who's the product manager or the brand manager for a product that has been in market for decades, and they're trying to get 1 extra point of market share or improve margins by 1%, their career path is supposed to be the same as yours. That makes no sense. When they pitch something to their boss, I think it's likely that 6 months from now we can achieve this financial performance for the company. Their boss has an expectation that they're pretty much going to be right. The prediction might be off by 10% here or there, and that would be pretty bad. You miss your quarterly target by 10%, that's bad. If you're an entrepreneur, you're very likely to miss your quarterly targets by 3 orders of magnitude. I promised $1 million of revenue and I have 1,000. But I've learned so much, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? You're gonna get fired. That's not the same career path, that's not the same accountability conversation, it's all messed up. So we have to recognize entrepreneurship as a corporate function. Team structure. The teams that I meet in corporate settings, and increasingly in a lot of startups, I think is really shocking, are part-time committees of functional specialists, which is just the worst. That's DMV level performance, okay? That's not what you want for a high performance team. Multitasking between multiple projects. The research on this is super clear. Multitasking is the devil. It's not at all effective. And if the project you're multitasking across are some innovation, some not, it's really ineffective. And just think about it from a career point of view. You're asking an engineer, could you spend 10% of your time on this wacky thing that's probably not going to work, and it's very likely to blow up in your face and get you in trouble, and 90% of your time on this thing that's almost certainly going to get you promoted and is basically guaranteed to work. So make sure you give them both fair attention. Whatever you tell them, it should be 50-50 or 70-30 or 60. If it's anything but 100 on the innovation and 0 on the sustaining thing, people naturally will gravitate to the thing that has clear career path beneficiaries in it. So that's a mess. So we've got to build a cross-functional team. So no multitasking, but also not single function. You can't just have only engineers or only product managers. A lot of companies I meet with, if you take the God's eye view and look down, imagine each of the functional silos as a giant physical silo, like a Pringles top can, you pull it off and you have the God's eye view and look in. Inside the silo, you'll see this great iteration experimentation, design thinking, customer development, agile development, DevOps, lean manufacturing. I can name for every function the well-established iterative methodology that people in that function use. And so you're wow, if I zoom out, this must be a very innovative and iterative company because all the people are working in iterative methodology. But how does work pass from function to function? It's a good old waterfall. They call it agile fall now in the agile world because you're doing agile in your little silo, but then you do your work product. Have you ever received the binder of a design specification from a highly iterative design thinking team? Now the output of it is they physically give you a binder of 500 pages that tells you exactly what to do. And the implication is the learning is done. Everything has been figured out, it's in the binder. If you can't figure out the product's not a failure, so you didn't read the binder closely enough. And so now as you're supposed to do agile, well 5 minutes in, they have a question okay, it says here that the thing should be fast and cheap and this and then actually physics requires 2 out of the 3. So which 2 out of 3 should we pick? And the designer said, I gave you the binder, okay, it's done. It was big. It's we have to do learning and discovery through the whole development process, but our organizations are set up, past work one at a time. So that's we have to fix those very basic elements to say, look, we're going to take an engineer and a designer and a product manager, and every function that's going to be represented in this team, they need to be full-time on this team. That's a startup. Go to Silicon Valley, you don't wake up one day and hey, guess what? You've been assigned to a startup 10% of your time. Report to Sand Hill Road this morning. That's not how it works. The people on there want to be there. They're thinking about it in the shower, and they have the kind of support of their peers. Say, we're going to figure this out together, whatever means necessary. That's what a startup should look like, and there's no reason you can't have that, even in the most bureaucratic organizations I've seen.
How do you give that cross-functional team the kind of urgency of a startup runway?
Yeah, that's very important. Most companies practice what I call entitlement funding. Entitlement funding is you have an annual appropriations process, kind of like Congress uses, and just as dysfunctional in most companies, where people battle it out politically to get their project onto the deck. You know what I'm talking about? There's one master list, everything the company's going to do this year and how much money it's going to get. The politics of getting onto the deck is intense. You got to know how to work the system. I've seen this in companies as small as 100 people, hot tech startups. This is how they do their annual appropriations. Unbelievable. Once you get on the deck, you're basically entitled to funding in perpetuity. That's how it works. Unless you have a catastrophic failure. Next year, your budget might go up or down, but it's not going to go from 100 to 0. It's going to be okay, we'll go from 100 to 90 or up to 1%. 110. Like it's going to be gradual quarterly adjustment. So the problem with that is, first of all, teams that have entitlement funding have no sense of urgency. Because like, what's the difference in getting it done this year or next year? Like, in fact, if the job is kind of a cushy job, like maybe putting it off a little bit might be nice. So no urgency, and also, you can't do anything cheap. So I go to companies all the time, and I say, listen, can we just do an MVP? So I want to spend $100 million for this awesome product. I'm like, great, can we do an MVP for $100,000? And we talk about that. Even if I get the team to agree that it can be done, there's no mechanism for spending $100,000 on anything. If I go to the management and say, we need to put a project on the deck and do an MVP for $100,000, everybody knows there ain't no such thing as $100,000. It's a $100,000 annuity in perpetuity. So it's much more expensive. So it creates incredible conservatism. The alternative is to say, we're going to do what we call metered funding, where the teams, you give a team, say, listen, here's your budget. It's fixed at $100,000 or whatever. If ideally, it includes not just development costs, but personnel costs too. Every cost, anything the company wants to say, your startup, it's your money, spend it on whatever you want. But do not, under any circumstances, come back to me and ask me for more money unless you have validated learning, that you're on the right track. That's like, whatever you want to say about Santo Road VCs, the one thing VCs do extremely well is when they write you a check, they rarely ask you for the money back. You know, the money goes from their bank account to yours and it's your money. That's good. There's no like, hey, can we have 10% back because we had a bad quarter? That's not how it works. But God help you if you try to raise more money, you haven't learned anything. I mean, it is almost impossible. When you create that mechanism for teams, it absolutely radically transforms the way that they operate. It's actually, it's so powerful, it's almost, people almost don't believe. Like I've been accused of putting something in people's water. When we have teams come in and do like a little pizza workshop and their behavior changes so radically, so quickly that people are like, what did you do to them? Just actually give them the opportunity to do real work. Pretty cool.
Another thing, though, that occurs to me that's very different in an established organization than in a startup is around the issue of ownership.
Yeah, very important.
How do you give teams in a larger organization skin in the game?
Yeah. The concept is called a stake in the outcome, and there's a great book with that title. Of course, I live in Silicon Valley. Most of the money I've made in my life is through equity ownership, and I'm a big believer in equity ownership as a way of giving people, I mean, just like the easiest, most literal way to say you have a stake in the outcome, you literally own part of the outcome. So a lot of companies believe they can't do that. Like I talked to a lot of people, like finance would never go for it, but I have sat down with corporate CFOs at the highest level and said, here's the way I think people on your team should be compensated. And they're like, well, you'll never get the divisions to go for that. But financially speaking, it's easy to arrange. Like it can be done. It's not that hard. But it's actually not that important. The research on financial bonuses and financial compensation is that like money motivates people to a certain degree, but not nearly as much as feeling a sense of mission and a sense of ownership in creating something that is great. So I've seen a lot of teams, and including like when you look at the teams from the White House we were just talking about, people who are in a government setting, but they're on a mission to do something that's really worthwhile. And the key to having that feeling of ownership is, first of all, the dedication is critical. Clear leader, you are the founder of this team. If this thing succeeds, you will get the credit, not your boss. Like a lot of people have a deal with their boss. It's like, if it goes bad, it's my fault. If it goes well, you get the credit. It's a very demotivating deal. One of my favorite old Toyota techniques back in the day from Toyota was inside the company, they don't refer to the Camry or the Prius. They call it so-and-so son's car. It's named after the person who was the chief engineer for that vehicle. That's how it's referred to. So it's not that the person has equity ownership in the Camry. It's that they have the moral authority to say, my name is on this project. And if you're trying to say, look, I think we should make a design compromise that doesn't make sense for customers, you can say, listen, if you want to get me fired, you can. You can go to my boss and advocate for me being fired. But you can't get me to put my name on this compromise. I don't think it's right. And the sense of ownership that that engenders is so much more than what most people have in their kind of part-time committee teams.
How do you deal with the fear of failure?
It's extreme.
Around this stuff?
Yeah. In a lot of organizations, you know, you're supposed to pretend that nothing ever fails. So, you know, like even things that do fail, you have to come up with a story about how that wasn't really a failure. It's actually what we plan to do all the time. And that means that most people are very skilled at retroactively adjusting the plan to indicate whatever happened. You know what I'm talking about? It's creepy, actually. Like I've seen people, I'm like, this is like 1984 level. You presented this plan to me yesterday. And now you're telling me that you presented me a different plan yesterday? And they're like, yeah. I have a picture on my phone. Let me show you the whole plan. They're like, you know, it's like the mind adjusts so quickly in these environments. There's a couple things that are key. One, just having the concept of a pivot is super helpful. I know we make fun of it in Silicon Valley all the time. Oh, pivot's like passe, everyone knows it. But like, if you're trying to do entrepreneurial things and you don't have that as a concept in your conceptual vocabulary, like, it's really hard. Actually, it's a very important concept to say, just because the strategy didn't work doesn't mean the stench of failure is now on this project and give up. It means, like, we want to stay true to that vision, but we'll try something different. And when you explain it that way, a lot of people can get excited about that as a positive thing. It's not a failure, it's an opportunity to learn something new. The other thing I recommend is a lot of HR practices and like performance management practices that are required for this. One of which I always recommend to companies is on your performance matrix, all your values and things that people are supposed to do every year, just put a line item for productive failure. Tell me how many productive failures you had this year. Now, if someone walked into your office and said, "Hi, I worked with this company for a year and I had 0 failures," one of two things is true. Either they're absolutely lying to your face. Who has no failures in the course of a year? Geez, I've had like several failures while I've been here at South by Southwest. In a whole year, give me a break. Or they didn't do anything at all. One way to guarantee no failure is to not do anything. And so like someone who comes to your office that I had no failures, you're like, well, this is bad or worse. Like, let's have a real conversation about that. Now, to add that line to your review matrix, you have to do education of the company about what is a productive failure. So productive failure is one where you learn something really valuable and you were able to stop doing something. A lot of companies have an excess of projects that really need to die, these zombie projects that you put the silver bullet right to the headshot, like that's what's needed. So that's a very productive failure. You save the company a huge amount of money. Or, yes, the project in its initial incarnation failed, but we learned something really valuable that allowed us to proceed to a success. Most companies, most organizations cannot tolerate glorifying failure, although I never actually see that anywhere, but people are afraid of that. So you really got to make it clear, productive failure is one that ultimately led us to do something we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do.
So you mentioned to me the other day that when people come up to you and they ask the same questions over and over and over again, and you know the answer, then it's time to write a new book. So
I did mention that, that's true.
I figure it's probably time for you to write a new book.
Yeah, that's true. So hi everybody, I'm here to announce I'm writing a new book. Thank you for that. That was a good layup. Look, when I wrote the Lean Startup, I swore I would never do it again. For those who've had the experience, I'm told it's a lot like giving birth. You swear you'll never do it again, and the nostalgia kicks in. There's some truth to that. I was so hard and so painful, it took so long, and I was like, I'll never do it again. But that experience of when I first started talking about Lean Startup, people would pester me with these really tough questions about what does an MVP look like in hardware? What does it look like in this? And how do I know exactly when it's time to pivot? And how do I know exactly what metrics to use? And the first couple times, I was like, those are hard questions, and I worked hard on the answers. And when I started to get those questions over and over again, and started to be able to give people satisfactory answers, I was like, it's not very efficient to change the world one person at a time. We got to get some scale. And I got some scale through a block, but the book was really effective. And so I've kind of reached that point again where I feel like there's like a next body of work that it makes sense to share. So I am going to write a new book. I've just agreed with my publisher, which is Crown here in the US and Penguin UK in the UK, to write it. But here's the thing. Traditional publishing, I don't know if you know anything about it. It's not exactly like lean, agile, it's really slow. And so this book is not going to come out until 2016 or 17. It's still a ways off. And I just felt like, that would make me a huge hypocrite if I just locked myself in a cave and just type. But also, I really am very excited to get feedback on some of these ideas and kind of test them out in the wild. So today I'm launching a Kickstarter campaign. That's actually why I'm here. Thank you. I think they'll be able to put the URL on the screen. There you go. For something I'm calling the Leader's Guide. So here's the MVP concept. See what you think about this. I do all this work with companies, huge enterprises, startups, do these transformations. I've done them now for a couple of years. And I have this pile, it's almost literally a pile in my house of material that I use for teaching these workshops, case studies, curricula. The work, that's the work that I do. And so I thought, all right, we're gonna do a one-time only, single print run experiment. Only available on Kickstarter for the next 30 days, not available ever again. In fact, I have a contract with my publisher that this cannot be sold in stores. So we're not gonna be selling this to you 31 days from now. This is it, one chance to get like a field book that's way too technical and detailed for like an airport business book. Like you can go into a lot of airports in the world and you can buy the Lean Startup and you can read it cover to cover, and that's awesome. Those of you who've done that, I'm eternally grateful. This is not that. This is gonna be, okay, you are in the trenches, oh shit, like trying to do Lean Startup, and my boss says, like, okay, but what's the ROI of this project? And the guy from finance says, I need to know what the financial projections are. And the people working for you say, but hold on, don't we have to get the quality standards up to a certain level? Steve Jobs would never, we'll have all the Steve Jobs would never things. they addressed in great detail. Because those are the questions that actually come up in real life. I get asked that question, by the way, in companies that are so far from Apple you wouldn't even believe. Like, you think Steve Jobs is working here? Are you serious? I mean, I appreciate that optimism, but it's get real. So all that kind of stuff in this book called Leader's Guide. If you back the campaign, you will get the guide this year, so very soon. We will also do a private community. So like the purpose for this for me is really to learn from all of you, like what happens when you're implementing these ideas, and I'm not just standing right there, as your like person on your shoulder, but you're actually using them on your own. I want to test out, see what happens. So we'll have a private community online, only for backers of the campaign, to share your stories with each other, to see early chapters, give feedback, and some of those stories we hope will be research that will show up in the new book. And because my publisher, although they were a little bit nervous about this at first, has actually gotten really excited about it, and now they're on board. Thanks to their support, everybody who backs the campaign will also get the new book when it comes out. So if you're excited, now's the time to do this thing on the screen. How are we doing? Can someone read this? I guess we've raised some money. I can't actually read what it says, but I hope it doesn't say 0. Okay, we're doing good. So thank you all very much. Yeah, I appreciate it. So that is the campaign. I hope you all will check it out.
Yeah, I don't want to indulge in more vanity metrics here.
Yeah.
But how many levels of participation are there?
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Thank you. You see, Tess keeping me on track. Those of you who remember the launch of the Lean Startup, like I like the Tim Ferriss approach, which is shock and awe with ridiculous numbers of rewards and cool experiences you would otherwise get. So there are 25 backer rewards. If you're thinking about doing a Kickstarter campaign, this is not considered a best practice. You're supposed to do 7. I couldn't bring myself to do it, so we have a bunch of super cool, practical, useful stuff for your team, like developer packs and Lean Startup Conference. But I'm most excited about the, you can spend a day, customized day behind the firewall at Andreessen Horowitz, like come to Sand Hill Road, like have a Silicon Valley experience. We, I think, already sold out the pair program with Kent Beck, the founders of Agile Programming, but that's one I would buy if I had that opportunity. You can spend a day with Brad Feld in Boulder and learn about Techstars and his companies. You can spend 3 days in Las Vegas with the Downtown Las Vegas Tech Project. And then there's a bunch of ways you can connect with me, come we get to have lunch and all that kind of good stuff. So it takes a little while to scroll all the way down to the end, but it's worth it. But then don't have a cart abandonment thing. That's what the best practices say. If you decide you don't want to spend $5,000 to hang out with Andreessen Horowitz, it's okay, just go back up. You do get them back, okay? So please, yeah, thank you.
So what, one of the things that I think is so cool about what you kicked off with the Lean Startup is that it's just so much bigger than you, that there's other people have sort of put themselves in a position of leadership.
Totally, oh yeah.
There's all the meetup groups, there's other authors writing books with the title Lean Startup.
So many of them, yes.
Right. So I wonder if any of this leads toward a kind of certification where Lean Startup becomes.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and a lot of the people that you're talking about have asked me to develop an official Lean Startup certification program and stuff like that. I'm not a fan of that approach. Like, first of all, to me, being a certified entrepreneur is like, it just seems like the dumbest concept. I just can't imagine anything dumber than that. It's like, I'm sure somebody can come up with something even more idiotic, but that is more certifiable than certified. It's kind of how I think about it. And the other problem is just what you said. This isn't about me. Like, I don't want this to become a movement that is like, get your like official like portrait of Eric like hang up in your office and like you get the stamp of approval from me. First of all, if you take these ideas and use them and make them your own, like, first of all, I'm not responsible for what happens. Like, you need to think for yourself and make sure this actually makes sense for the situation you're actually in. And a lot of companies, I think it's very important, translate these ideas to make them really their own. So they rename concepts. And like, I was just, we told one of the very famous tech companies in Silicon Valley, I just talked to a manager who works there. I was told that the word lean for using Lean Startup is banned. You're not allowed to say that. You can't use any concept. We can't say minimum viable product, but he's like, well, but we still have the problem, even though we banned the terminology. So we just made up his own terminology for comparable concepts and just started using them as a manager and had a lot of success. And now they're like, he's like famous inside the company for having done this leadership. And I'm like, amen. Make it your own. You don't need to have the like certified, trademark, whatever. Kind of like this work with GE, I know a lot about Six Sigma. And kind of a lot of people now are saying that the GE version of Lean Startup is kind of the next Six Sigma for them. And those of you who know Six Sigma, like they literally had belts of different colors. So by analogy to martial arts, you get the white belt, the green belt, and you become a Six Sigma black belt. And I understand why they did that. I think there's actually a certain wisdom to it, but There's a one thing that I'm just afraid of, and I don't ever want us to have in Lean Startup. When I started doing these workshops for companies that had that experience, we would say, listen, this is entrepreneurship, something you learn by doing. You don't really learn it from a book. You don't really learn it in class. Like at best, we give you like a bit of a map, and then you got to go use the map in the territory. So when you come to one of my workshops, you have to bring a project to work on during the workshop. And the first time I said that to one of these leaders, they said, well, is that a hypothetical project or a real project? And I didn't know what they, I was like, I'm sorry, what's a hypothetical project? What does that mean? You have so much extra time that you're going to make up a fake project to work on? And like in certain certification programs, that's considered the way you do. You make up a fake project to work on because it's more ideal for learning the concepts. And to me, that's just exactly backwards. So like, I'm terrified of the day that you could like learn Lean Startup from your hypothetical project. If you don't have anything you're actually working on that you think could be more entrepreneurial, like, A, what's wrong with you, seriously? B, why are you here? Nobody in this room, like, surely. But C, like, well, go find something. Like, go immerse yourself in a technical discipline. Like, get an idea that you're passionate about, and then learn Lean Startup. Like, don't learn it just for its own sake. This is a fully applied science. It's designed to help people accomplish things and have that dent in the universe experience. Like, if you're not going for that, please stay away. So yeah, I'm hoping there will never be colored belts, although I'm told to never say never, but I hope not.
I think we're ready for questions from the audience.
Oh, awesome. Hi, everybody.
You can move out to the microphone and just tell us your name and your affiliation, and we'll roll from there.
Hi, my name is Ari. I'm a local entrepreneur here in Austin.
Nice to meet you.
And nice to meet you too. Thanks for coming. And a lot of what you're saying is resonating with me. I have a particular skill set in software development. And I guess my question is, in all of the research that you've done and all of the people that you've met, particularly founders who've become leaders of large, medium to large companies, how did they make that transition from such a narrow, specific skill set in, technical to actually like managing people? I hear a lot of people who get into management positions who were once technical, and they decide that, it's not for them because they can't deal with it, but obviously it's possible, and I'm just curious as to the methodology to get there.
Totally. This was my personal career path. It's something I feel very passionate about. I was a programmer, and then I managed programmers, and then I managed people who manage programmers, and then I advised people who manage programmers. Like, at a certain point I was like, wait, what do I do for a living anymore, and how do I know I'm doing a good job? Like, I'm very removed from the actual work. This is my bias, but I think software people and engineers generally, but especially software people, have an advantage when it comes to management. Because we're used to thinking about systems engineering. And the conceptual leap you have to make, in my view, is that management is human systems engineering. You have to learn to see the incentives and the connections between people that cause their behavior. So it's in some ways more difficult than debugging servers because humans are awfully complicated. But today's servers are pretty complicated too. So like debugging human problems, it's hard, but it's not that hard. And the key is, psychologically, most of us are built around what they call in psychology the fundamental attribution error, which is when you see someone screw something up, you don't apply this rule to yourself naturally, but when other people screw something up, you realize that you decide that they're a bad person, that's why they screwed up. So it's a character flaw, it's something intrinsic, it's one of their fundamental attributes, they can't do this. When in fact, most of the time, the behavior that you see with other people is like strongly influenced by the system and the environment that they're in. So if you could train yourself to avoid the fundamental attribution error, and say if somebody makes a mistake, like what I thought about it when I was a manager, if my systems are so badly designed that it's easy to make a mistake, shame on me for making such bad systems, rather than this is a bad person who needs to be fired. So I think if you could work on that, that's the kind of the path to a kind of a more human management type career.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi Eric, my name is Paolo. I am the founder of Intercultural Group. I had a question regarding your working in the organization space abroad.
Sure.
I was curious to ask you, what was your biggest cultural shock working with companies based abroad, and perhaps you can also give me your top tip on how to do business across business, borders.
Yeah, sure. Here's the shock, and this is, you're not going to find this a very satisfying answer, I'm afraid. What shocked me is how little cultural differences matter. I was very primed for certain cultures are more entrepreneurial and certain are less, and certain are this and certain are that. And I don't want to say cultural differences don't exist, they don't matter. And of course, this is very much in the perspective of most of the international work I've done is through American multinational companies. So, I'm by no means the expert in this topic. But as far as entrepreneurship and doing this kind of transformation goes, once you learn how to translate the concept into the local culture, which is important, people everywhere I've gone, from Asia to Europe, I haven't been to Africa, but in other places, people get excited about it and they're able to do it. So to me, I'm going to say something that's useful. But everybody thinks the cultural difference will make it not work. So for every pairwise culture of people that I have worked in companies with multiple people, everyone thinks that it works in my culture, but it'll never work in that culture. Including when I went to Japan for the first time, I was giving a talk, it was being simultaneously translated to Japanese, and someone said, how do I reconcile what you're saying with the Japanese way of work? I was like, this is based on the Toyota production system. This came from Japan, what are you talking about? But everybody has their stereotype of whatever, and I just think you gotta look past that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't think those differences are as significant as people make them out to be.
Well, I'm glad to know we are on the same page. I evangelize the fact that to be successful abroad, you have to focus on similarities, not on difference.
Amen. Thank you for that.
Hey there, Eric. My name's Esprit Devora with the We Are LA Tech podcast. In the Netherlands, they put a timeline on survival. I think it's either a year or 2 years. If their startup doesn't work, then they cut it. Do you suggest that that's a good way to build a successful startup, to have a time when you stop? Because there's other companies that keep on going and then they do make it at a certain point. So when do you call it a day?
I think this is an interesting question intellectually, but it's not that important practically, because the truth is almost all entrepreneurs stop only under one condition, and that's when they run out of money. I mean, let's be honest. There are cases in the recorded history of entrepreneurs saying, I've had enough, I want to give up, I want to do it, but we're a pretty stubborn bunch. And that's kind of the problem. So the issue of the zombie startup is real. And I think zombie startups are worse than failed startups. Zombie startup is a company that people still work at, and there's still enough money from somewhere to keep them employed, but there's not enough money to actually have the impact that everybody signed up for. So the mission is failing, but the company is still alive, and the damn thing won't die. The number of people I know who are incredibly talented, who out of loyalty and sunk cost fallacy can't leave a zombie startup because they read in that paper that one time. There was that one startup that zombied along for years and then all of a sudden became hockey stick, you know what I'm talking about? That might be me. And it's well, yeah, but you might go to Vegas and make a lot of money too, but let's be serious. So I think it is important to have techniques for stopping the zombie startup. I don't think arbitrary timelines or deadlines is at all effective. To me, the number one thing you gotta do, I understand you're not in a zombie startup, but maybe you have a friend?
No, I backpacked through Europe visiting startups in 14 countries, and I was fascinated by the way the Dutch handle building a startup.
Okay, so nobody else is in this situation, I'm sure. But if your friend ever has a situation that they're wondering about, this is why having the concept of a pivot is so critical. The conversation about should we give up and go home or not is just don't ever have that conversation. Either just, if you're having that conversation, you can just give up and go home, it's fine. But don't waste time talking about it, just do it. In all other situations, you want to really ask yourself, what's the evidence that our strategy is taking us closer to the vision? And that you can put a deadline on. You can say, I'm going to stick with this strategy for a fixed amount of time. And on 6 weeks from today, I think you do it as soon as possible. Do it regularly, do it every month, do it every quarter. Periodically say, what's the evidence that my strategy, and if it's not there, pivot. You don't have to just give up, but try something different. Just bang your head against the wall over and over again. Because many of all those stories we know of people who persevered through 19, whatever, they didn't just do the same thing over and over again. Because I'm not pretend that they did. There were important pivots along the way that allowed them ultimately to learn from the failure and become successful. So do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was introduced to the Lean Startup while working at a big consultancy, and they have the discover, design, deploy, all the D's, there's 5 of them. And the conflict came in at the discover part. It allowed enough time for it to be informed, strategic. Everybody wanted to just get to the MVP.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that the MVP is informed, inspired, strategic, and you're not just jumping down?
Yeah, this is one of these questions that has a kind of technical and formal answer, which I'll give you, and it has a practical answer that's a lot easier. So let me give you the formal answer, which is, questions about MVPs are questions about experiment design. Now, if any of you ever have an actual science background, and if you went to a scientist, you're like, tell me the best kind of experiment. They'd be like, you're high. What are you talking about? what are you trying to learn? Let's design an experiment, like when we're doing like astronomy and when we're doing chemistry and when we're doing like, depending on what it is, you either need the Large Hadron Collider or you need like your high school chemistry kit. And like, it kind of depends what you're trying to find. Like, so there's no like a priori, like, this is the best way. Now, so a good MVP balances the fidelity of learning with the speed of execution. That's where I was trying to find the sweet spot of like, it's good enough that we learn something, but it's not super complicated that we put off learning indefinitely. And most companies have the disease, they want to push off to too high a fidelity, and that's, you know, the root cause of all these problems that we talk about. That's the formal answer, is find the sweet spot. The practical answer is it actually doesn't matter at all. You're much better off doing something quick than doing something complicated. And the reason is, let's say that you and your team are convinced that unless the MVP reaches this level of quality, then customers won't like it. But you decide anyway to just ship an MVP that's halfway there. It's not quite good enough, and customers look at it and they say, this piece of crap, I can't believe you were such an idiot for shipping this thing that's so low quality. Like, that's not bad. Congratulations, your customers agree with you exactly what's wrong with the MVP. That's not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is you ship the MVP, you show it to customers, and they don't say anything. You ever ship a product and get zero feedback on it? No comments, not even a snarky person in Hacker News saying it sucks. Nobody cares. That's the problem. So, like, the practical answer is like, whatever the minimum thing is, like, try that and make it more complicated over time. Now, the thing I'm guessing is your experience. I'm just reading between the lines here, so if I'm wrong, tell me. I'm guessing.
And I'm a strategist, so I was the one getting the shortcut.
Yeah, exactly. So my guess is what happened is you'd be afraid, or maybe your team would be afraid, that if they did that half-hearted MVP that wasn't quite as good, that the company would give up. Say, well, see, it didn't work, so we give up. And that's the paradox of lean startup. It sounds like everything is about quick and fast, and of course, that's the tactics that we talked about. But it only makes sense to do those things if you're trying to accomplish something that's based on a long-term philosophy of change. If you're just going to dip your toe in the water and be like, oh, it's hot, give up, like, that's not lean startup, and that's actually like a waste of time. And if you're not trying to do something ambitious, if you just want to do something small, you don't need an MVP. Just go build a small thing. It's a waste of time. You don't need it. But if you're trying to do something big, you got the commitment to each other as founders, as coworkers, say, listen, we're going to keep experimenting with this until we figure out what works or run with money. But now, take this with that corporate entitlement funding thing I was talking about before. If there's no deadline, and you could go on forever, everyone in the organization would be afraid of becoming that zombie thing, and so the first sign of failure, they're going to like cannibalize your thing and get their thing on the deck. You know what I'm talking about? Well, not you, but anybody else know what I'm talking about? So that's why it's like this is a whole system. You need the whole system together. If you could say, we will take this team, cross-functional, fixed budget, clear mission, and we haven't talked about accountability, but like the specific metrics for accountability we can talk about, then go build a bunch of MVPs. That team will not be afraid that, oh, if customers don't like the first thing, we give up. They'll know that they have the support of the company to keep trying until they get it right. And here's the secret that a lot of entrepreneurs are really afraid of. Sometimes when you do the crappy MVP, customers like it better than the complicated. That makes people really mad. You know, the great thing about the internet is you have the Wayback Machine. You can go back and see what people were actually saying about their own products at the time. Like, everyone knows today that the reason Google is a huge success, they understood the power of simplicity, and they weren't a complicated portal like whatever, but like, I go read the About Me page of Google from the early days, and they're like, listen, we're really sorry that we don't have a whole portal thing yet, but you know, it only searches Stanford and Linux, but we're like totally gonna add all that stuff later. And like, guess what? If customers like your low quality crappy thing better than the complicated thing, you can retroactively claim that you do it all along and become famous. It's no problem. The press is very, not you, Ted, but other members of the press are very happy to help you tell that story. It's no problem. So enjoy. Like, go put the crappy thing out there and let customers tell you it's horrible. And like, don't feel like you have to decide that in advance. That's my 2 cents.
Hi, my name is Simon Pierce. I'm a founder from New York. I guess my question is a little bit of a practitioner question.
Sure.
In looking to apply lean startup, we've had a bit of a pain point at times around committing to an engine of growth.
Yeah.
And choosing between sticky, viral, and paid. And I wondered if you had any insights on overcoming that hump with your partners.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, engine of growth is one of the innovation accounting concepts from Lean Startup, where it's like a formal way of modeling how your growth is happening. So a lot of startups are like very focused on growth. So we want to have week over week growth. But think of this as like growth forensics. All growth is not equally valuable. Like, oh, you were on TechCrunch today, woo, you got a bunch of users. Like, that's not actually very valuable growth compared to, hey, your viral engine is working, your K factor is positive, and that's trending in the right direction. So if you want to talk about the math of that, I can, but it's math, and it's still kind of early for South by. So maybe not. We won't get into math right now. But each engine is an instantiation of what we call the law of sustainable growth, which is a situation where new customers come from the actions of past customers. So there's 3 of them: viral, paid, and sticky. The trap is that most companies don't want to commit to just one. Like, well, I want to be a little viral and a little sticky, and I want to be a little, a little of everything. And it seems like choosing one is foreclosing other options, but actually trying to do it all is actually doing nothing. If you look at the companies that have been successful with each of those engines of growth, it's like declaring a major. It's a specialization. The companies that are really good at viral growth are not good at TV advertising. The companies that have really sticky product, like, they don't do viral very well. Like, my favorite example is World of Warcraft television commercials. You know what I'm talking about? Like, they suck, and it's fine. It doesn't matter. Like, they're not great commercials, but like, they don't live by that. They live because their product is like one of the most addictive substances on earth. And so, you can't stop playing, and if you stop playing, you can't cancel your credit card account because we can kill your character for 100 hours. Like, no way. So that's a really good business to be in, but it requires specialization. Procter & Gamble, their products aren't quite as addictive, so they have to specialize in paid acquisition. They're really good at it, and if you just randomly mix and match techniques across engines, you don't get a whole that makes sense. So I really strongly recommend that you pick one, and this is why the Lean Startup is really helpful for this. This is why it's part of Lean Startup. We're going to make it an assumption, a leap of faith assumption, that we can pick one and it's going to work out. And then you can write on the calendar a date. Say, you know what? From now until that day, we are just going to act as if it's all about viral growth, and that's going to be our focus. But we're going to have this pivot or persevere meeting scheduled to reevaluate if we want to switch to a different engine at that time. So instead of arguing about it every single day, which is a huge waste of time, if I could have all those hours of my life back, God, I really wish I would. You'd be like, we're going to postpone the argument for 6 months and have the argument then. And during that time, we're all going to be all about engagement, all about retention, all about whatever the one thing is that we're really going to focus on. And if it works, you'll know. And if it doesn't work, then you can safely try the other. That's really the key.
16, sticky.
Yeah, okay, here we go.
Hi, Eric. Wen Ting, and I work at a mid-sized tech company called Rubicon Project. So I have been fortunate to work at GE as well. So I think as an employee, very different culture, very different type of reputation. So I guess if you can just break down, company size by big corporation to mid-tier to startup, and kind of what are their main pain points that they ask you to come in to give advice for. I think everyone in the room is all from different size companies.
Yeah, look, it's not that different by size. I know nobody believes this, but it's really not. The question is always, how do I get more growth through innovation? Now, one thing I have learned that surprised me is that most middle managers really don't care about innovation. Innovation has become this buzzword that people do not like talking about. I try to use it as little as possible. Obviously, it's hard to talk about this without using it. Managers care about growth. That's true. You have people are like, oh, if only my startup had 1 billion users, but the curse of having 1 billion users is getting 1 million users is no longer exciting to anybody. So you have 1 billion users, and you launch a new app under your brand, and only 1 million people try it on the first day. It's like you're depressed. Everyone in the company is like, that was a failure, we should try something else. The first time I saw that, I was like, what are you talking about? I would love 1 million users on one day. They're like, oh, well, that's not going to move the needle. We have 1 billion users. We need at least 100 million to show up in the decimal place. That's the problem. So everyone wants growth. Everyone wants new sources of growth that aren't just the thing I had before. And that's really the question that I want to talk to them about, is what do you have to do as a leader to make that happen? And of course, the tactics and the specifics are different, by size, by sector, but the core question is really the same, and the structures are the same.
Do you feel like certain companies focus on a certain part of the function? So for example, is it financial, is it operations, is it sales?
Well, GE is a good example because they're a very engineering-driven company, as you know. And so the first project we did together at GE was actually a diesel engine I was mentioning before. It was they wanted something real far from software. This was Jeff Immels's idea. He's like, if we're going to test this out, we're not going to test it on some software thing. We're going to do a tough assignment. And the first workshop we did together, if you've ever been to GE's Crotonville facility, it was parodied very well on 30 Rock, if you guys got 30 Rock. It's very impressive. This team was asked to come out to Crotonville to have this workshop with me. And there are 25 VPs working the company sitting in the back of the room to observe. So to visualize, it's not the best day of their life. This is a rough assignment to come into this workshop. And so we started with we talked about, hey, what does the MVP look like? What could a lean startup approach here? We did that. That project was really successful. We had a lot of positive things out of it. Some of those corporate VPs that started off very upset, came around and said, hey, this is exciting. And so then it's like, okay, well, now let's try some more projects. And we started with all engineering stuff, at G. So it was like, the first round was, a turbine, the refrigerator, a neonatal healthcare device, uninterruptible power supply. I was like, ain't no software in this package, but like really different stuff. But like it was product oriented, and we did 4 projects at a time, and then 8 projects, and we were doing projects. And then we started to say, well, if this is going to be a company-wide transformation, what about the other functions? And then we started to do sales and marketing type projects, HR, IT, finance. I have been to the deep, deep bowels of corporate America. Okay, I have seen the most boring things one can see, and applied the startup to those things. So it sounds boring, but it's actually very exciting to see a lifetime like IT manager in one of the most boring jobs on earth, like be transformed into an honest-to-God entrepreneur. It's actually a very inspiring thing to see. So depending on the company, where it starts and then where it goes will be very company specific to their culture. Engineering-based companies will start in product and move out, but other companies, the engineers are the problem and the rigid people, and they don't want to change. Like then it will start in marketing, it can start in finance, it can start IT, start anywhere really.
One last question, where your inspirations come from, whether it be a company that you think does it really well, or people that you look up to that that is part of your...
Yeah, sure. I'm spoiled for riches in the answer to this question. I don't like to name drop specific company names because it's like so tempting as a business author expert to be like, oh yeah, Southwest Airlines does it my way, and Apple, and every good company does. And when those companies fail, you have to go retroactively erase all those mentions and pretend you never said that Enron was a good company. I don't want that. I just don't want to have that experience. So what I would say is for that, I do a conference every year, the startup conference. Go to the website and we make the videos from all those. You can watch them all and see for yourself. To be honest, the inspiration, the thing I find the most inspiring by far, more than the other famous people I do get to meet sometimes, and getting to do this, when I travel the world and go to these lean startup meetups, it's not 700,000 people, it's like 12 people in a room in somewhere not in Silicon Valley, not famous, and I meet people. I'm always asking myself, why are they at the lean startup meetup in the middle of nowhere, from my point of view? It's like, because they're not trying to get famous. They're not hoping one day that this will lead to some career in the media. They're like, I am doing a startup that I passionately believe in, and this is a way to advance the state of the art of my entrepreneurial practice. And compared to everything else that I do, that is what really keeps me going, and that's what I really draw inspiration from. Because those people are never going to be on a stage like this. They don't have any hope to, I get all kinds of benefits from being a lean startup guy that they never will have. Yet, they don't care. What they want to know is how do I make this change happen in the world? It's important, and that's where I get my inspiration.
I'm sorry to say, we're out of time. Brutal.
Oh man, I will answer your question though if you find me. Okay?
Great.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much for coming.
Appreciate it.